So, welcome to our first free webinar of 2023. Yay! Happy New Year, everyone. This webinar is going to go over just introduction, orientation, reorientation to Story Champs. And if you don't know anything about it, great. I'm going to take you through it. But if you do have some knowledge, this is still a good webinar for you because we'll go through the kit itself. I've got it right next to me and we're good to go. I just wanted to show you briefly what our webinars for this year are going to be. You can register on our website. It's at the top. It kind of yells at you. Well, there's a banner. It says register here or click here. I should know what it says. I put it there. But obviously, so this is the January webinar. Next month, I'm going to break down the lesson plans and go over all the components, what parts you should not adapt, and what parts might be flexible. And then in March, we're going to have, hopefully, have a guest speaker. There's no commitment yet. It's a busy month, but we are. If not, it's me, Dr. Megan Kirby, Dissemination and Implementation Specialist for Language Dynamics Group. We're going to go over teaching complex academic language. Then we get into some other subjects like the information lessons that you're going to see that come with the kit. Then how to use this kit if you have older students. So it's not just for primary grades, but it works wonderfully with older students as well and adults. How to expand your lessons. So when you become a pro, what else do you do with the kit if you're tired of just running lessons? I don't see that happening. July, we're going to take off, and that's our break. But then we're going to get into August, September, and October. Assessing oral language, academics, language, going ahead and assessing narrative writing skills. We have some really fun things to show you and updates to the Cubed, that free assessment that we offer on our website. And we are going to go over the Spanish kit for Story Champs. November, Dr. Trina Spencer, one of the co-developers of Story Champs, is going to be here to talk about if you're interested in research, if you want to learn how to get involved with research, opportunities to partner with us and help us inform iterative changes to improve our products, and kind of what's in it for you. And then, yeah, we'll get into just next December, a year from now, how to prepare for school breaks and holidays. So tonight, this webinar is just about, what is Story Champs? Who is it for? And how do you use it? And it's just going to be very, very basic. And then I'll leave some time for questions at the end if you have any. And then I will be sending out to everybody who's registered a link to the survey or questionnaire form so you can get a certificate of attendance. So I will email that out tomorrow. So first and foremost, so what is Story Champs? So Story Champs, it's a multi-tiered, and what we mean by that is you're going to see there's different lesson plan formats, but it's multi-tiered. It's a language intervention, but also a curriculum. You can use it for grade level instruction. It can help teachers, educators, clinicians promote academic language or oral language skills of diverse students or a variety of clients, right? So it is semi-manualized. And what we mean by that is that we provide instructions, as you'll see today, for how to run a lesson. And that lesson should be followed, that plan should be followed in all the steps because our research, as you'll see, will show that it's effective. And so Story Champs works, but if it's not working, then the first thing I usually recommend, it's not working for your students or clients. First thing I recommend is go back and make sure that you are following those steps to a T. And then the second step is just contact me and we can troubleshoot together. You have access to me for free. So that's what we mean by it. So it's semi-manualized. There's a scope and sequence that comes with it. But we do have explicit teaching procedures. You can differentiate for different students in a variety of ways that we'll might have time to go into today, or if you have questions about that, please stay on. The intervention is intended to be delivered by anybody with what we would consider like a high school diploma. Anybody who can read and can follow instructions, they can watch videos for free, demonstrations of Story Champs lessons on our website, old webinars, and then just read the manual and go forward. So there's no certification that needs to be obtained in order to deliver, implement story champs. Um, Ideally, with my role, Language Dynamics Group would really love to create in-house trainers, so like a train the trainer. So if you've received instruction from us directly, like you paid for it, I will offer, to videotape that for free so it can stay in-house. And if any new hires come on board, that's why a lot of school districts love it. Any new hires come on board, you can just watch that again without having to pay for me. So there's more in it for more people. So the primary focus of Story Champs, I keep bringing up uh, this webinar and other times, it's the development of strong oral language skills. And so the primary focus is this, what we call academic language. If you can build really strong oral language skills, like the basis of it, then you're going to have this scaffolding that can then be built on top, because aspects of language that are essential for school and like school success, but beyond that, like into adulthood, um, can be taught through Story Champs lessons, right? So that's information retells. So when you're in science or social studies or history classes and you need your students to work on the ability to not only like orally answer comprehension questions about what it is that they read or they just heard a passage read out loud. Can they retell that passage? Is it complete and coherent? And also, did they get the main idea and key details? We cover that. Vocabulary learning, writing, um, comprehension. So Story Champs works on reading comprehension and listening comprehension, both of those. And that's really because the structure and organization, the complexity of these narratives that we use, as well as informational discourse as well, um, it reflects like in our stories, they reflect the language that students need to be able to read and write proficient, like in school. So it's what they need to be successful in school. So if you can strengthen oral story, let's just call it storytelling. It's something that comes a little bit more naturally to most students or most children. It's something that's valued in our cultures. We've been practicing it for like eons, before we could even write and we were drawing pictures. Most of our values and our rules in society came down through storytelling. It's how we pass on traditions, religions, etc. So this is something that comes relatively easily or can be learned relatively easily through and efficiently if you're using something like Story Champs. But it actually will help then with recall, sharing information, acquiring word meanings. You'll see that under the vocabulary and grammar, we have explicit instruction. We have lesson plans for how to teach students to infer the meaning of new words using context clues. Wouldn't it be great if, like, and this is a whole nother soapbox, but wouldn't it be great if vocabulary, we could teach students how to learn? So it's like learning to learn skills. That's what we teach and Story Champs with those context clues and inferencing lessons that we offer so that you're not going to need to be with that student and have to come up with a million different vocabulary goals and follow them the rest of their life in order for them to acquire new vocabulary knowledge. Um, it's generative in learning is what happens. But anyway, as you can see here, there's tons and tons of skills. They're developed through Story Champs, and this is just like a brief summary. Okay. Our evidence base is super extensive. We have that I know of like 30 something studies that are like published, and that's what we know of. There sometimes we'll get a Google alert and someone has used it in a study and we have no idea who they are. It's great when that happens. We just submitted about 3 more this week alone. Go Trina. Doug's finishing up another manuscript that will be submitted for review tomorrow, hopefully. So this is kind of, we are constantly updating our interventions, but our assessments as well, based on the research that we get, and then through, participants like you all who want to help us with that research. But here's just like in a brief, if you need to know, like, what is it effective for? On the left-hand side are the average effect sizes. Just think of it as like large effects are the bars that are filled in. Like it's really strong evidence that it is going to be effective for For example, story retelling, writing, reading comprehension. It means like more than one study. The studies are in peer-reviewed journals, so it's not Story Champs isn't just evidence-based because evidence can come from anywhere. Can come from me, and I'm just publish something on by printing it out and handing it out, right? That technically could be evidence. So is observation. It's not really good, but we want to say that no, this stuff has been reviewed by other scientists and verified. Um, what else? So yeah, let's get into the kit. I want to make sure that we have enough time for this. So here are all the program materials and key components that go like primary ingredients that go into a Story Champs kit. So when you order Story Champs, this is the box that you get, right? If you have the bilingual version, the Spanish English, it's basically 2 kits in one. You've got all materials that need to be translated in Spanish, um, in addition to everything I'm going to go through here. That's the English only version. And I will point out, so on the top it says language intervention. And so this is what most people use it for is for intervention after students have been identified in need of a language intervention, especially oral language. But on the side of it, somewhere, oh, yeah. So it does say like language intervention curriculum. So it can be used as a curriculum. Ideal world, like utopia is what I call it. All students in primary grades would have access to a really great research-based program like Story Champs. Doesn't have to be Story Champs, so that they can develop these strong oral narrative skills before they get into, later elementary grades, like grade 1, your year 1. And so it'd be great if that happened, right? So that would be used by a general education teacher or like a regular education teacher, not for students that have already been identified for needs, So in Utopia, that's what would happen. But most of the time we do get orders from people who that didn't happen and now the students are failing, right? So they need intervention. What you'll see in the kit, like when you open it up, there's a quick start guide. And we'll go into that in a little bit. You're going to see that you get a storybook. It's a little spiral storybook. Don't lose this. We don't sell it separately. Otherwise, people just like don't need the kit. They can make their own stuff. But the stories are important. You'll see things like popsicle sticks and stickers. You will get the illustration cards. We'll get into looking at these soon. You'll have these like in plastic wrap. They're called Champs checks. Go over that as well. There's going to be sheets full of little icons that you pop out. If you're old enough to know Pogs, that's kind of like what they look like. There's a bag of die. There's 4 die, and they have the Story Champs Story Grammar icons on them. Then you've got story starter cards are in that bag, and then in this bag as well is the flash drive that you need, like super imperative. If it doesn't work, you're going to want to email me, and I'll hook you up with a fix. And then there's smaller bags within here that are going to be used for your icons, not the die. So, okay. So we'll get into all of this, but there's a lot of goodies in here. Oh, there's like bingo. See, I even forgot. There's bingo cards. So all of that comes in here, and there's so much more on that flash drive. Okay. So first and foremost, the master lesson plans. Those are located on that flash drive that comes in the kit in a small bag. It's purple for the English only kit, and then it's green for the bilingual kit. It is 100% necessary. That is a necessary component of Story Champs. There are 57 different lesson plans. They are grouped by large group, small group, and one-to-one delivery arrangements. So once you know what kind of arrangement that you need to deliver a lesson in, like you're not going to use large group if you only have one student, right? So you don't need to print out all of them. I don't recommend that. I just recommend you print off the set of lesson plans based on the arrangement that you're most likely to use. And then maybe over the years, as you get more comfortable, you can branch out. Maybe you should branch out and say, okay, this year I'm going to master one-on-one intervention. So I'm going to do one-on-one lessons. I'm not going to try to do it all, like both small group and one-to-one, and have it becomes overwhelming, and usually what we call the response effort weakens the MO. So in behavior analysis, this is when the amount of effort or calories, like caloric energy, that you have to put forth for something and the reward isn't really going to match the amount of calories that you just spent on it, then you're not likely to do it. And so for me, it's changing a tire. I will call my husband to leave his work that's an hour away before I have to change a tire. Because by the time I figure it out, I'm already bored. So I don't even get started. And that's usually when there's so much on top and it's overwhelming. This happens at work all the time. It's in our daily lives. You just don't get started and you push it off until the last minute or you just don't do it. So if you have a really beautiful kit, I don't want it to sit on a shelf and collect dust, right? So I recommend that you just you pick one type of lesson plan or teaching arrangement that you want to practice and get really good at. And then next year, you can set a goal for learning a different type of teaching arrangement. Okay. You can also display, like if you have a tablet or a computer and you're not big on to printing things out, I do not recommend you laminate them. Lamination is awful for the environment, can never be recycled. It's actually better for you to just keep printing paper and ink than it is in the long run for laminate to be used. So I recommend put them in page protectors. So print out all the lesson plans, put them in page protectors and change it out, print out new ones if it gets wet. All right, so the table of contents, I don't keep looking over because I have another screen, but the table of contents that is on the flash drive will give you a good idea as to what lesson plans, like there's a sequence and an order in which you're going to be working on things, and it's going to come in numerical order, okay? Let's see. So on each lesson plan, like right here in the upper right-hand side of your screen, you're gonna see that it looks like little check boxes next to all the steps. And basically these master lesson plans outline step by step, so task analysis, procedures for delivering instruction, as well as like scaffolding that's necessary to make sure that what you're doing and all the time and energy you're spending and the time you're with that learner is effective, that it's worth it, right? So do not modify the steps or eliminate them from the lesson. Don't cut a lesson plan in half. Um, you should use it every lesson until you become like a whole master. You could train someone in your sleep. So it should be out with you pretty much for a while. For me, I still need to reference it just to remember that I'm doing the right steps or that I'm on track or not spending too much time on something. So again, we have large group, small group, and one-to-one lesson plans for all of the targets that you need to work on. Each lesson is going to last between 15 for like one-on-one, like 15 to 45 minutes max. But on average, I found um, for new users, plan 25 to 30 minutes, more like 25 for small group and one-to-one, and then you will get it down to 20. And then if you're spending way more time than 30 minutes, please email me and we'll set up a meeting so I can talk, because anything more than 30 minutes is really just not feasible in the real world, right? And so I want to make sure that you don't give up on story champs just because it's too much time, and that you're not cutting steps, because then it's no longer using the same research-based steps that we use. Okay, so those are the lesson plans. Again, they're not included. They're on the flash drive, one, to keep the kit cost lower, but also two, to make sure that you only print out what you need. But the storybook, this one right here, this is also critical. Like you can't use story champs without the stories. They're carefully structured so that you can maximize your instructional time. Like you don't have to go find a storybook at a library. How amazing is that? You don't have to create or like adapt anything from classrooms or from books that you have on hand. You don't have to add things. And so they're already pretty, they're well written, and they are aligned with the expectations that are usually put forth by, your state or your district, your school district, or your actually school. So there's two sets of stories. There's classic and blitz, and that's in the table of contents, you'll see that. So there's two different sections. The classic stories, there's 12 of them. And the first 12 stories in your book are really when you're first beginning a program. So when your learner is just starting Story Champs, they're new to it, you're going to use classic stories because they are simple, they have high frequency vocabulary words. The purpose is just to teach story structure. So if your students cannot retell a story with a complete episode, like it's just not there. A great way to know or find out if you're curious, if they can, use those free cubed narrative language measures reading or narrative language measures listening assessments that we offer on our website, again, for free. Um, New versions coming out this year, still for free. But yeah, go ahead and use those, and then you'll find out whether or not they can tell a story with a complete episode. And if they can't, that is your first primary goal. Please don't work on advanced vocabulary or teaching inferencing skills, or don't work on information lessons. Just there's usually in my mind it's just like, oh, please just tell me the story so I can like understand it. Just beginning, middle, and end. And that's why we would use the classic stories. Blitz stories, they're more complex. They have lower frequency words embedded in them, and they're loaded with tons of complex linguistic features and also developmentally appropriate levels. So as you'll see here on the screen of the table of contents, like level A Blitz is going to have vocab, so is level B. But then you get to level C Blitz stories. And in level C, we first introduce the causal connections. So you're going to see stories that have tons and tons of words like because, so that um, they're really salient, so there are more opportunities for the learners to hear them. All right. Then on the flash drive, there are tons of printable files. So that's like in a bag in the box. Small little flash drive, USB. Sometimes they decide to stop working. And if that happens again, you're going to reach out and get in touch with me. But there's so many printable files on this drive. They need to be printed and copied if you want to use them in the lessons, or classroom centers, or things that can be sent home with students after lessons. So what you'll see in the upper left, well, in the left-hand side right here, it says take-home activity. There is a take-home activity that corresponds to every single level A and level B story. Like we have made an exact replica of that story that you would have worked on in your lesson that day, so that it can go home with the child or the learner, or it can go back to the classroom and it can be worked on even after school programs. Like I have, some of the older students have to do hours, like volunteer hours, and I have the child practice with that teenager because at home the paper isn't likely to leave the backpack. In those cases, at least they're practicing with someone. For our Spanish kits, we also have those translated into Spanish as well. But basically, it's activities that correspond with the story that are used at school. So it goes home and it's just worked on at home. If your lesson plan references a specific thing like a word journal, then you're going to find those things or those materials that are needed or required for the lesson as stated on the lesson plan. You'll find those on the flash drive. So that's number one. So like what comes in the kit. We'll get into like how to use some of these things in a little bit. But who is it for? So all students can benefit. And I kind of hinted at that because what we're finding out now is that this heavy dose of, and sometimes only uh, really instruction is in phonics. And so it's great. I'm not saying it's a bad problem, but like there are two skills that make up what we consider reading, or like true reading or reading comprehension. The ability to understand what you read, like that's one construct over here. And then there's the ability to read, like reading words and sounding out. Right now, most schools are really focused and have bought in and gone all on, as they should have, materials available to teachers with the phonics part, right? And the phonological awareness and phonemic, like great. But what's going to happen in the next few years when the students are tested again, and in the United States, it's always the fourth grade reading scores that we look at. And we test them again in a couple more years. Those students are going to be failing still. And when I can already see it happening, in which schools are going to give up and blame and be like, oh, it didn't work. We shouldn't have spent all this money on phonics. One of two things could happen. That happens, and then the folks who are not who hate the science of reading, just they hate science, are going to come back and be like, see, we told you. And that would be a horrible day. Like it would be horrible. But if things were de-implemented in terms of, just like look at the picture and guess what the words are, let's call that old school reading instruction that wasn't teaching at all. Let's say that phonics isn't the end all be all. In a dream world, they will realize that teachers don't have access to and aren't being provided tools to teach listening or comprehension or language. So there is no language program in addition to the phonics programs that are going to help kids understand what they read. So great, they can read a bunch of words, they can sound them out, but when they get older and they're going to be reading text and coming across unfamiliar words, only those students that have background knowledge in these new vocabulary words that know what the Eiffel Tower is because they were read a storybook about it or they went and saw it and they went to Paris. Our students who are lower income um, really just unsupported, right? And have little to no access to like maybe free public libraries, the resources that make really good education in the primary years. It's not fair for them to continue to fail because they can't bring any background knowledge to basically guess what that word is, right? And so they're going to be, or these terms, and they're going to need explicit instruction, and then we're going to label them as quote unquote disabled, right? When in fact, if in the early years alongside phonics, we were giving them this oral language program, it doesn't need to be intervention yet. We're teaching them, the meaning, the structure of language, the upper strands of what we consider Scarborough's rope, um, that are just not just word decoding and word reading. Then they're going to be all right. So then they won't be feeling those fourth grade reading exams. But let me get off my soapbox. I feel like everybody here is totally like we're all on the same page. But that's what's going to happen, right? So when it comes down to it, most of the time we'll get individuals to who are speech and language pathologists located in schools, and so most of their students had little instruction in academic language early on, and so they benefit from this intervention because it's quick, efficient, and it's targeted, and it's going to address a whole slew of language skills. But even typically developing kids, with the average language skills, they benefit from increased focus, and that's where the curriculum idea comes in. It's vital for kids who are and are not at risk for academic failure. We have tons and tons of research. I'll get on the next slide of using story champs with students with disabilities, students where there's a mismatch, not a mismatch, where there's a difference between the language used at home and the language used at school. So academic language used at school, you need that language and the knowledge of that language to be successful in school, right? Versus you can check that weird language at the door at school. When you go into your home, you're not going to be using causal ties and temporal ties and noun verb modifiers and relative pronouns like that, which, who, and whose. You're just not. That's weird. But you're going to encounter it in school, right? So that's where Story Champs really is helpful to help students who are not going to be exposed to that academic language in the home setting, because that would be weird. It's multi-tiered, right? So it can be delivered in a variety of settings. So it's appropriate for students, again, in general education and intervention levels, and any age group. I mean, unless you can find another evidence-based program that is available for older students, which there doesn't exist one yet. Maybe someone, we're making stories for older students, but it takes years. And we'll eventually have a curriculum for upper grades. But until that happens, really Story Champs is still going to be effective, and it's not too babyish. So I'll do a whole nother webinar, but there are people who are buying Story Champs as an intervention for their students with disabilities in middle and high school. Some adult English language learning classes around the world also using Story Champs. Okay, and so the feedback is the learners are not put off by the stories. They want to learn, right? And they want to be successful. So this is the research, right? So yeah, Story Champs, it's extremely flexible and versatile. So it's going to work with a wide range of students with and without disabilities. You'll have English speakers, children with autism, um, English language learners, bilingual children. Research has been done, I don't know if I have a slide for it, but it's been done all over the world. Offhand, Mexico, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, France, England, missing one, India. And so we've got a lot of children that have seen the effects of Story Champs and it's been positive for them. Okay. And then in the upper right are just like the actual published stories in case you want to see, or the published studies. Okay, so then I'm going to get into, before we get into how to use it and spend most of our time there, um, who can use it, right? So Story Champs is designed for school teams, designed, ideal utopia world. So that general educators and special educators, they are going to use it in a multi-tiered system of language supports, right? So MTSS for reading sometimes, but like language is the underlying basis there, or response to intervention or RTI, right? Um, but it's useful even if there's not a tiered model, that we have a lot of speech and language clinics that use it, or private schools that don't follow a tiered model. Ideally, that a classroom teacher would use large group lessons. The students that aren't making progress because there's ongoing progress monitoring would then be flagged as at risk, and then usually some other person, if not the teacher, will do like an extra dose or an extra lesson using the small group lessons that are provided. They just print it out, and run a small group lesson with those students that aren't making progress in that large group setting. And then if they still are not making progress, then that red flag goes up, right? Here's my response to intervention model. If they need one-to-one to make progress, there's something else going on with the student, right? And so it does provide a means to show that there is more need for specialized or individualized instruction. Literacy specialists, paraeducators, or teaching assistants can use it. Um, I mean, most frequently in the preschool classrooms where I've been and trained, that's who runs the lessons, and then the teacher does the assessments intermittently. Um, but yeah, teaching assistants find it pretty easy to run, and it's easy to learn. So I would say, to ensure the fidelity and adherence of it, please don't get scared. So use the lessons, try it out. Don't be so scared that you're not following all the steps, or like you keep having to look at the lesson plan. Don't worry about that. It's about getting comfortable first and then improving the fidelity. You want to not reference it too often and like let too much time go by that you're wasting your time and that the learners. But you can also read the manual very carefully. It's on the flash drive. You just print it out. It's about, I don't know, less than 20 pages. Um, and you can watch demonstration videos at our website. So that's www.languagedynamicsgroup.com. And it shows, I mean, they're kind of old, but they do show demonstrations of lesson plan delivery across all three different teaching arrangements: whole group, small group, and one-to-one. So that's on our website. Um, but yeah, it's just very essential that if you have that lesson plan and you follow it, you will see effects, and they will be positive. Sometimes it's just slow and steady, but other times it's rapid improvement and success. So most questions, now that you can kind of see what's involved and like why you would use Story Champs, is about how you would use it. Okay, so at the beginning, and the top of your kit, just like literally when you open it up, there's a piece of brown paper, and then you're going to notice that there's this quick start guide. And this quick start guide right here, it has a page, it folds out a page, one per grade level. So it starts with preschool, or primary, and then it goes to kindergarten or year one, first grade, second grade, and third grade. And that's if it's going to be used as a curriculum, right? This is the scope and sequence to be used as a curriculum for a general education teacher or collaborator, special education teacher, based on that grade level. So on it, you're always going to see the first column on the left is basically the construct, or like what the target is going to be. So story structure, informational structure. These are the lessons that are lesson plan headers that are available. Then what I consider to be the second column is a list of all of those standards that are usually covered by your state. Yeah, minor adjustments to wording, but most most states still kind of, stole it. They say they don't use Common Core. I live in Florida, and heaven forbid, but our state standards look really, really like those Common Core standards. So they didn't rewrite them from scratch. And so those are pretty normal across most states, and then in most countries as well. By the end of your year one, that would align with our grade one students, our first grade page. Then in the middle, there are a list of all the lesson plans. So the first column, right, the name of the construct. The second is academic standards. The third column says master lesson plans. And so we basically say, hey, if you want to work on this, just follow it over. Oh, you're teaching large group? Then you use master lesson plan, blah, blah, blah. So on this actual screen right here, for third grade, to work on describing characters in a story, their traits, motivations, feelings, to create and tell an original story, to tell an original A story. Sorry, there's a typo. Then you would use large group lesson plans 12, 13, and 14. So in general, this just tells you what lesson plans to use. But if you go to the bottom of the screen here, the bottom of the quick start guide, you can see that there's cycles and then there's recommended number, suggested number of sessions to be using certain things. So here on the screen, if I am in a general education setting or a large group, it's a regular classroom. I'm delivering it to all 25 to 30 of my students. For the first 6 sessions of Story Champs, if I'm just new and let's say it's the beginning of the school year, I will use Master Lesson Plan 12. I'll work on advanced story structure. My story level that I'll use is level J, Blitz. I'll be working on language complexity and words, teaching words from context clues, right? And so in the parentheses, it just says like, hey, use these if this is your target. And so after 6 sessions, so as little as 1 a week for 6 weeks, if I'm getting through that whole lesson plan, you will see effects. So as long as you're doing that entire lesson in one session and you're using different stories every time you do a session, the lesson plan stays the same, stories change every time. Then you're going to see effects. So maybe after 6 sessions, I'm going to move on. And then you're going to see the next 6 sessions, fictional generation and individual writing. So I'm going to work on those. And then the parentheses are those, in bold are those lesson plan numbers. So cycle 1, I think of like as beginning of the year, cycle 2 as middle of the year, and then cycle 3 as end of year. 6 is a suggested number. It might take less depending on your students, or it might take more sessions before you want to move on. Now, the gray row right there at the bottom is really if you're looking at Story Champs as an intervention, and ignore the grade level at the top. Here's what I recommend. I look at this, so my background is special ed. And so if I'm a teacher, my students were like A6. So, and they were all with me the entire day in this special ed classroom. And there's a wide variety of kids. So I would, on average, if I wanted to use this in a small group, I would look through this and be like, okay, where are most of my kids at? And I would be ignoring the grade level at the top. And then I would be like, oh, okay, so probably is going to be kindergarten because my students need to retell a story with key details. And I would grab a lesson plan and just stick with that and just follow the scope and sequence where it says low in terms of language skills. And I would follow that but I would most likely assess as well to see that it was even appropriate that they're making progress. And that succession things usually I'm not holding to it because I base the progress and moving on and changing lesson plans based on my students' progress, and I'm using the cubed or NLM listening with them to know, like, okay, we still need to have, this lesson plan. We still need to be doing some sessions. I'm not going to just move on. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions about this, put them in chat and I will get to them. Okay. Now we have on that USB, we also have a digital presentation so that you don't just have to use the physical icons, like those little pop out cardboard circles. You don't have to just use the illustration cards that come in this box, okay? And so if you're gonna, that way you can project either on a computer or like a larger screen or interactive like touch whiteboard. If you're doing whole group or small group, it's super helpful. But you absolutely, every single lesson, you still need, or every single session, you still need a lesson plan. You absolutely need the storybook because that's not available on the flash drive. And you need to figure out, you need those visual supports, right? So you need to figure out, am I going to use the projection, what we call the digital presentation format, or am I going to actually use these materials because I want to have them, laid out on a table? So it's up to you. And then the reason why we want to tell you that the stories are an absolute must-have, or again, because they're written for you. You don't have to differentiate. You don't have to modify anything that you would get from a the library. Um, and that's good because we spent so many so many hours. It takes about an hour to write just a cubed an NLM reading. I think it took me an hour the other day to write one. No, I wasn't even writing it from scratch. I was editing someone else's. So there's a lot of time and energy that goes into it and research. But again, so when you're looking at the Story Chant stories, remember there's two different types. The first 12 stories are needed when students usually or learners begin the program. And they're simple stories. The whole purpose of using them is to teach story structure. Then you're going to see like, well, like how do I level them? Usually level A is going to be like your preschool kindergarten. By the end of kindergarten or primary grade, by the end of that year, you should be able to retell a story with character, problem, feeling, action, ending. Okay, so like that's most standards around the world. But then you get a little bit older and you need to add in setting and end feeling. And so, you can use these stories with older, oops, there you go. You can use these stories with older students, right? But I wouldn't recommend that you stick with it too long. Okay, then you've got, oh wait, I was gonna show you Blitz. All right, so then the Blitz stories, you can still have level A, which is just has those 5 components. But the Blitz stories right here, those are gonna be, I use them if I am doing intervention with older students, but they still need to just tell me a story with those 5 parts. They're just tend to be a little bit more interesting and the words that the students hear at least are more complex, so at least they're hearing them. And so with the Blitz, what you see here is that we have embedded tier 2, more complex academic vocabulary, right, into the story. And we do that, you'll see the vocabulary words that you can use to do explicit instruction to teach explicit definitional knowledge. They're on the left. And then on the right-hand side in the box are these 2 words that we embed in our level A stories for Blitz and context clues. So the ones in bold are the targets that we're trying to teach students to use then the italicized words as the context clues or italicized information. So if you wanted to use, or if you're teaching a lesson plan about teaching, Blitz vocabulary, you're going to need to use this box here. Otherwise, you can just read it. Okay, then we get all the way to more complex. So that was Bryn. Show you back. Bryn's melted mess. So level A, story 13, right? So Bryn was getting a chocolate candy bar at the store because she helped clean the house. After Bryn, I could totally be reading this here. After Bryn got her candy bar, it melted in the car. She felt disappointed because her candy bar was ruined. Bryn said to her mom, "Can I have another candy bar, please?" Then Bryn's mom bought her another one. She quickly gulped down her yummy candy bar. She ate it fast. It was delectable. Okay, so that is a single episode story, and our focus is just on character, problem, feeling, plan, attempt, action, something to solve that problem. And then consequence or ending, and then that's it, right? So we want we want our students just to be able to retell with those key parts. Now, at least they heard the words, but I may not be working on a lesson that even bothers with those vocabulary words. Your lesson plan will tell you. That's the best thing. But when you progress or when our students are older, hopefully we can get them, as they're aging up to 3rd, 4th grade and above. Then we start getting them into level J stories, and that is the highest level or the most difficult level stories. So Bryn's melted mess, right? So we just read you aloud the single episode, but now in our level J we have double episodes. Okay, so we can provide the same illustrations, but now we can add a little bit more. The same illustrations can be used for multiple levels of the same story that just become increasingly more complex, especially because you don't need to find different stories, right? So that if we're working on causal ties, we're going to add the words like because and so that. If we're working on temporal, we take those out and we make the Bryn's melted mess longer. This would be for level D. We would add more when, after, before, while, as, until. We would add words like that, okay? And so when you get all the way up to level J, the highest one, you're going to see lots and lots of those modifiers. They're in bold right there. So complex vocabulary, you're going to have context clues to be able to be used. You're going to see and hear tons and tons of causal and temporal subordinating conjunctions, um, so on and so forth. Okay, but you're also going to notice that there's a double episode where the first attempt to solve the problem doesn't work. So, Bryn, I hate this story. At level J, I hate level J. Because she holds up the chocolate candy bar to the air conditioning vent. And in my mind, it's now all in the air conditioning vent. So if you've been in training with me, you'll know. I can't make it through reading the story. I'm not going to do it tonight. But basically, that doesn't fix it. And so she has to do something else. The main character has to do something else to try to solve the problem about, like, she wants the chocolate bar and it's melted. And she wants one. And so she has to do something else to try to fix that. And that's asking her mom for another one. And then the story ends. There's a resolution where her mom buys her another one, which would never happen in my household. So moving on. So that's the storybook. You got to use the storybook. You cannot just use the illustrations and try to make up these stories. There's a reason why they're written and the way they're written. The lesson plans, all you have to do is just print them out, like I said before, and follow all the lesson plan steps in order. We always start off, the first step of any lesson plan is model the story. So what you do is have your illustrations out or ready to go. And so you would, if I'm going to read a story, the illustration cards are, let me see if I can hold them up a little closer. But yeah, well, maybe not. There you go. Okay. Up in the side of it, there's a little box. It's colored and it has two numbers. The first number goes with the story number. So Bryn's Melted Mist was 13, story 13, for any of the levels, but story 13. And so you would go to like, oh, which one's 13? And you would pull them out. And then the second number after the colon is the order in which that particular illustration comes in. So from left to right, right? So that helps you in case they get super out of order. You don't have to write on them. The information's already there. Please don't use these as picture sequencing cards. We have sequencing stuff. I'll get to that in another slide. Already on the flash drive for you. Just do not ruin these. Don't poison them. These are just for lessons. So you would just follow the instructions. So modeling the story, you have these out already, or if you're using the digital presentation, it's easier. And then you would have the storybook in front of you and you would read the story. And as you're reading it, you're putting the icons on the pictures. So what I would recommend you do, and I think it's right here. I don't know if you can see this very faintly, but I have underlined all of the key parts that go along with the parts of the story that have an icon. I have underlined them with the corresponding color of that icon. So in this particular one, this is level B. So one time David, and I have it underlined in purple, and purple is the color of the character icon. So as I'm reading this and I come across one time David, I'm grabbing my character icon, I'm putting it on the first photo. Okay. I do this as a visual prompt for myself so I look competent, like I knew what I was doing, versus the first few times, even still today, if I picked up one of these and it wasn't all marked up, I might struggle. So yeah, might be some prop dependence there. But I wouldn't be going as fast. I would be like, oh wait, do I put this setting down now? You have to do that as you read. Okay, you put the icons down, not before, not after. You do it as you read so that students can hear and see at the same time and start listening for those story grammar parts that fit in that structure. Okay, now I made a mess of this, so. Okay. So you just follow all of the steps and you do not cut those steps. Rule number 1, don't cut them. Then we've got story games. So on this lesson plan here, We don't have any story games under materials. We don't list that. But most of the small group lesson plans, if not all of them, say, select a story game. And this is what we mean by those. So the purpose of a story game is to ensure that all students are actively engaged in something. So they're doing something while a single student or learner is retelling or telling a story. So they're busy, you're helping them practice. We use airless learning. We do not assess during story champs. I should have a slide for that. Kids love story champs because they always get things right, as they should, because you're actually teaching. We're not teaching through consequences and allowing them to fail and then teaching them, no, that's not right. Try again. No, say after me. No, if you know they're going to get something wrong because that's why they're receiving intervention, then you go ahead and give them the answer. Like, who is the story about? Remember, John was riding his bike. Who is the story about? See how I just gave them the answer. That's how we should be using story champs and really teaching and modeling, and then getting them to repeat and not moving on until they can say what I modeled. So I always recommend too that you model only what you know your student can say or your learner. But meanwhile, as I'm coaching the student, I've got other kids, right? And downtime is always our worst enemy. So the story games are supposed to keep kids busy and touching things and moving or like listening for the parts of the story that their peer has been saying out loud or retelling or that I'm helping. Now, only one game is really needed per lesson. And you can use story gestures. Those instructions for story gestures are also in the demonstration videos, as well as the manual. But the bingo game, those are in the upper left. You give each student in the small group a bingo card. Make sure that correct level, according to the story level that you're using, A or B, is facing up. And as the student that you're helping is telling that part of the story, they look on their bingo card and you can put something on it, or they can just touch it, put a token on it, or just put their finger on it. What did they just hear their friends say, right? For story sticks, which is in the bottom left, they look a little different now. We have colored popsicles. I recommend you only put one sticker. We have we have stickers, enough stickers to have 2 per popsicle stick, so 1 sticker on each side. Just put them on one side, so that way you can, if popsicle sticks get eaten or something, you can go ahead and replace those. They sell them all over, the colored popsicle sticks, and you cannot replace those stickers. And I don't want you to have to I don't know, find a way to Xerox copy the icons and then print them out on sticky and then cut it. Don't do it. So save those stickers because most likely the popsicle sticks will get broken or eaten at some point. So you would give those and students would hold them up as they're hearing their peer tell the story. And they come across those story parts. Story cube, those are the die. Each student gets one and you just turn them so the corresponding story grammar icon is facing upward. That was just heard. So there's no rolling involved. I used to hide these from my students until I really realized that oh, that's how you're supposed to use them. So it's especially for older students, it's or kids that really need to fidget. It's better for them to have the die because they have to keep looking for it and then face it up, and it gives them something more to do, a little bit more tactile. Then large groups, we developed the champs checks, and that's to engage all students in independent storytelling so that you are not listening to every single student's retell at a single time. Okay, so it's basically, we know peer tutoring works, the research says. It's an evidence-based practice. And so we've built that into Story Champs so that it's going to support partner retell. Kids are just more likely to do better when they're working with another peer than with an adult, most kids. So it's necessary for large group lessons because there's no way in heck that you're gonna, in a 30-minute lesson, be able to make sure each kid had a chance to retell the story. So they retell it to each other. So one champs check little card that's in your kit. So it looks like this. They're already kind of laminated. Don't laminate them anymore. You know how I feel about that, but but in general, you don't need to. Dry erase markers, they're ready to go. So one per pair. Okay, so not every student gets one of these. And you'll notice, you'll be like, oh, I don't have enough, but one per pair. And then they go off. So it says partner 1 and partner 2. They go off and the first speaker is retelling the story or telling a story. And then the listener is marking whether or not the student, their partner, told or retold the story using that icon, like that story grammar component represented by the icon. If they didn't, then they're tutoring their peers, like, oh, you forgot the problem. They learn this over time, so you just kind of teach the icons the first few sessions. Um, we only recommend, and this is in the manual as well, but we only recommend you really teach the icons only in context during a story champs lesson. After you told the story and you put the icons out, then you're like, this is character, say character. And we have those steps built into the lesson plan. It tells you how to do that. But you really only need to do that about 3 times, no matter your students' capabilities, because the steps are the same really in that modeling retell. The icons are the same across all the lessons. They'll get it. And so you don't want to waste time teaching those individually. Please don't teach them in discrete trial instruction. Like, I know I'm a behavior analyst. I know we're known for loving discrete trials and like, what is it? Show me, touch the. Um, but that's not good teaching. And so that's not a great use of your time. And so they will get it. They will absorb this information and they will understand what these things mean. Um, Slow and steady progress, if anything, right? But anyway, okay. So chance checks, yes, necessary for a large group, but you can totally use them with your small groups as a different type of story game, especially if you have a small group of, let's say, I say like a small group of 5, because then I can partner or pair my students. Um, that's like max. I really, really would suggest that if you have a small group of 5 or more students, definitely 6 students or more, please use the whole group lesson plans. I know it seems like, oh, but I don't have a whole group. That's a whole group. And based on the number of steps and the amount of time it would take, and then I don't want you to have to revise the steps. Our small group lesson plans are really, really designed or written for groups of 4, 2 to 4, and that's it. So I don't want you to have to adapt and like add a step for a 5th student. Just pull the whole group or large group lesson plans. Use those; they will still be effective for intervention. Okay, and then you don't have to adapt them at all because the steps are going to work. Okay, let me see what else. I think that's it for now. If you have any questions, um, yeah, go ahead and contact us at training@languagedynamicsgroup.com. Uh, I am Megan Kirby, so I'm the dissemination and implementation specialist. I'll be monitoring that. And so I will totally answer your questions.